Hi, I'm Mridula here, and once again I'm here in front of you. Today we are going to talk about sociology of education. All of you who are students of bachelors in education have gone through multiple topics. This topic is almost like a binder. Today's topic, we're going to discuss how when we make use of certain theories in class, we make use of certain approaches or strategies when we design our curriculum, what kind of a social context do we bring into it? So, education is something that does not stand in isolation. What happens is that whatever comes into our curriculum, whichever way we treat our students, the way we deal in the classroom, everything has a social context to it. And today's topic is about that context and how that context is built. What are some of the background thoughts? What are some of the cultural, economic and social factors that come into the classroom when we are dealing with the classroom, when we are handling our students. We've called this particular part Sociology of Education, School of Thoughts. We will talk about a couple of popular and powerful schools of thought that has been impacting our education system, that has been impacting our curriculum making till date. Of course, sociology of education is a very recent development. We have been using it definitely, but I don't think there was scientific study done to understand how our own culture, our own family structure, the kind of background we come from, the kind of political nation we live in, and what are the value systems that are propagated in the political system, how these have a high impact and a very critical impact in our education system, in the nation building and in also the creation of future citizens of a country. We are going to look at from the very beginning a quick touch on what is sociology, where sociology, to put it in very simple terms, is the study or knowledge of society, right. So, we understand how a society functions, how it is formed, what are the diverse pulls and pushes of any society when we talk about sociology. So, when we say society, what do we actually mean? We mean, society is nothing but people living in groups, to put it in very, very basic terms. So, sociology comes under two categories. One is sociology or the scientific study of people in groups. The other is social psychology, the study of individuals within their social and cultural setting. If we look at the large global villages we are talking about, each group of people live in a particular social and cultural setting. There may be certain familiarities across these groups, there may be certain differences also. What is it that sociology aims at? What is the goal? It basically wants to understand and explain the patterns of social behavior, how people interact with each other, what are some of the social issues they face, and how they deal with these social issues. Of course, any other field of study, when we talk about sociology, there are various theories and approaches, and these are called the different schools of thoughts. So, let us explore some predominant schools of thoughts. So, when we are talking about schools of thought vis-a-vis sociology of education, four major schools of thought come to mind, and they are structural functionalism, conflict theory, symbolic interactionism and feminism. We are going to talk about each of these and understand how they have impacted our education system. When we look at structural functionalism, we obviously look at Emil Durkheim, and Durkheim talks about how the various segments of society serve a larger purpose for society as a whole. His stance is that each segment has an individual work to do for the total society, just as each parts of the body has a typical work that it does for the whole body to function effectively. What Durkheim talks about is that each segment of the society has an individual work. It is almost like a grid formation, which means that you have grids and guilds, and each of these grids and guilds provide or do a particular aspect of work for the society, so as the society functions in a holistic, in a all-rounded and in an effective way. In Durkheim's context, he talks about how, for example, providing emotional bonds is one segment to raising children in a family. So, when we are talking about raising children in a family, there are various segments that help us to raise children effectively. One of them is to create emotional bonds. Similarly, when we are looking at learning in schools, teaching children knowledge and skill is one segment, right. So, what he says is that multiple such segments together help us to raise a child effectively or bring optimum learning in a school, right. So, each of these segments, according to Durkheim, has a particular function, has a particular role to play, and that is the role that they play. They do not move out of that role. In fact, if you look at Durkheim's context, or if you look at structural functionalism, very clearly what he talks about is that social problems that we face, they are temporary, right. They are like fever, and they are something that can be cured. So, therefore, one need not worry about those, and one can move on with the segments that are available already in the society and propagate those segments, right. So, when we talk about this particular rule or this particular aspect of sociology of education, what happens is that education is a part of the society, and in society whatever has been built in, whatever aspects of conducting or let us say managing the society has been built in, the same is replicated in education based on various processes, based on people's social background, that is the student or the learner's social background, based on the students family background, let us say the cultural and also the economic background. Learning happens, or the kind of education given to them is meant to maintain this status quo. Basically, that is what structural functionalism talks about. And what Durkheim says is that when a child goes to school, the school works as a platform where the child learns what is needed for him or her to get back to his cultural, socio-cultural setup and get back to the kind of occupation which he or she can do better or do it effectively. This is one school of thought, right. But then of course, this school of thought has its own criticism, and we have what is called the conflict theory coming up. Conflict theory, which started with Karl Marx, and then built upon by Max Weber. What is it that the conflict theory talks about? Basically, the conflict theory says that it is power and not function that holds society together. Keep in mind that Durkheim talks about the functions that hold a society together. So, whatever role I play in the society, my child or my group of people will continue to play that role. However, if we look at Max Weber's concept, or even if we look at the Marxian concept, it says that it is power that holds society together. And within society, there is a competitiveness, there is a competition to get this power. So, what happens is when people are clubbed into social classes or economic classes or cultural groups, then there is a power or there is a natural competition to move in this society towards a position of power, right. So, therefore, for example, I am as an individual, I have certain demands, and largely if I am going to put it in this context, then I will go back and say, based on my gender I have certain demands, based on the kind of social milieu I belong to I have certain demands, based on the class I belong to I have certain demands, right. when these demands are there, and there is always a competition to make these demands be heard, and therefore get the decision makers, get the larger society to meet these demands. So, conflict theory basically says that there is a constant conflict between what is the status quo, what is the regular format or the functioning of a society, and there is a larger conflict between the society and the people of different classes to get their needs met. So, when we look at this, we see that Marx has done a lot of work in this, where he says that the social conflict theory is extremely important, where one is looking at maintaining equality in the society, whereby each individual is equal to the next individual. Each social class is equal to the next social class, irrespective of their gender, irrespective of their economic stature. In fact, the move is also to make everybody economically equal. The next one that we talk about, social school of thought of sociology, is symbolic interactionism. What does symbolic interactionism actually mean? Symbolic interactionism is derived from the American philosophy of pragmatism. It started particularly from the work of George Herbert Mead, and it's actually Mead's student Herbert Bloomer who worked with Mead and coined this term. And he put forward a very interesting summary of symbolic interactionism. He says, people act towards things based on the meaning those things have for them. These meanings are derived from social interaction, and they are modified through interpretation. So, symbolic interactionism actually says or explains how individuals learn about their culture. Once they have learnt about their culture, how they interpret and act upon their social words. It also says that we are all internally motivated, and therefore we interpret the world around us in a symbolic way. We talk about the world around us in a symbolic way, and not by the external motivations, but by the internal motivations. When we discuss about how this plays in the classroom, how when we form the education system, it is dominated by certain symbolic interaction of certain groups, for example, especially the affluent group in a society. If you look at the Western society, it is largely dominated by the white affluent group. But when we talk about India, we would say that it is largely dominated by the affluent middle class. In fact, it is the bourgeois that works on, that really runs the education system, because the bourgeois or the middle class sees the education system as a socially upward or an upwardly mobile process. It's education which makes the difference. It is seen as a differentiator. If you look at, and this is what most theorists say, that if you look at the aristocracy or the rich, or if you look at the economically lower class, you find that education is not seen as an influencer till date. However, there are different views, and what we see right now is a movement which has changed this whole context. We will discuss this as we go ahead. So, one of our French sociologists, a great thinker who did extensive work in this concept, is of course Pierre Bourdieu, and he talks about this whole concept of what is called a social capital, a cultural capital, a financial capital, and a symbolic capital. He says that each individual occupies a position in a multidimensional social space. He or she, that is this individual, is not defined only by the social class membership, but by every single kind of capital he or she can articulate through social relations. That capital includes the value of social networks, and what Bourdieu shows is that this capital, or the symbolic capital, can be used to produce or reproduce inequality. And he talks about how, if you go back to Durkheim's functionalism, he says that if you follow that particular model in the education system, what is happening is that we are again and again reproducing inequality in society. We are bringing students who come from a particular setup based on what kind of symbolic capital they are bringing into the class, and we are putting them into the same boxes without using education as a liberator, without using education to help them maybe explore the other boxes available, break out of this box, and that is what Bourdieu is talking about. The last school of thought is feminism, which talks about understanding and which emphasizes on the social roles men and women play in different cultures. What feminism talks about is that it strives to bring about change, both socially and politically. What kind of change does it bring about? The idea is to address issues of discrimination, whether largely gender related issues in the social roles that people play in our society, right? And the focus being that we bring about change by addressing issues like gender discrimination, violence, stalking, etc. How does this come into the classroom? If you and I look at any school or any center of learning, we find that by the sheer factor that there are boys and girls in the classroom, gender role starts playing, right? Students work according to their gender roles. They bring in these roles from the family structure or the society they belong to. And most often the same roles are reiterated in the school setup also, in the educational system also. We find that it is also reiterated even in our curriculum design, even the visuals that we present to our people. I have grown up studying lessons where when we talk about occupations, very gender specific roles are given. Most of the time, because I come from a much older time, I would find that roles which are related to within the house, in the domestic circle, which calls for more of service rather than being a provider, is identified and given to or allocated to the women. And those roles or those occupations which are meant to be more of a provider occupation is given to men, and the visuals are also the same. What happens to a child who is in school? Imagine a child at the age of 5 or at the age of 4 starts inculcating these roles. And when these roles are already inculcated, what is it that the child expects? The child comes up, builds a complete system where the expectation is that my mother or my sister or my aunts or my grandmother has to play a particular role. My father, my uncles, my brother, and so on will have to play a particular role. Very, very, clearly a role biased or a gender biased role system is created, right? And this is exactly what feminism tries to work against, right? So, to reiterate, what is it that we do vis-a-vis in sociology? We are looking at a method for bringing social aspirations and fears into focus. We are looking at what are these social aspirations and fears and how these can be brought into focus and knowledge of people, so that we are mindful of what these fears could be and how do we deal with these social aspirations of people from various aspects of the society, various parts of the society. What else does it do? It forces a sharp and analytic questions about the societies and cultures in which people live, thereby trying to uncover underlying patterns that give facts their larger meaning, that what exactly is happening, these patterns, and what is the purpose of making these social theories, how these patterns are formed, what are these underlying patterns, and how are they presented as facts, as norms. And when they are presented as norms, then they create a meaning system, right? And when they create this meaning system, very soon we say naturally we are like this. As per our culture, we need to do this. Meaning, we are reiterating what has been an underlying pattern which has been created across time, across various millenniums, right? We need to look at these social theories and see how we can deal with these social theories to be able to address our social aspirations and to be able to address our fears and bring them into focus. But as teachers, what is it that you can do? What is it that you need to be mindful of? That is something you need to keep in mind, because as teachers, each of you is a reflective practitioner. You are not just a participant in the functions of the society, but you are also creating a new set of people who will go back to the society and work with the society, right? Therefore, it is very important that I or you as a reflective practitioner must know how major elements of society fit together. You need to understand the relation between the school and the society. You need to understand why students behave the way they do in and out of school. Very, very important to become an effective teacher, and extremely important for teachers to go back to the school and be able to provide a much more evolved and a much more liberated, open system of learning. We need to look at how theories about the relation between school and society, what are these theories, whether the schooling is actually making a major difference in an individual's life. Is it really making a difference in individual's life is something you need to keep in mind. Are we as teachers and are the schools and their own principles, the way, the philosophy of the schools, are they influencing social inequalities? Meaning, are they actually continuing? Are they helping in continuing these inequalities, or they trying to break these inequalities? So, how school processes therefore affect the lives of the children that they come to school, teachers, and also other adults. Because remember that when parents are involved, when teachers are involved, and when children are involved, they again form a microcosm of the larger society. School is also one of those such societies, and within this the games of societal differences, societal familiarities, norms start playing their own games. So, there are 4 interrelated levels of sociological analysis that we need to keep in mind: the societal level and its system of social stratification, the institutional level, which means the family, school, religious spaces, and so on. We need to also keep in mind the third one, which is the interpersonal level, which talks about various processes, various interactions, various symbols that become a part of our system that we are building and we are practicing in our transactions with each other. And last but not the least is the intrapsychic level, which includes every individual's thoughts, beliefs and values that has become a part of that individual's belief, again which has come from the sociological background that he or she comes from. So, what happens when we talk about these interrelated 4 aspects that we talked about vis-a-vis sociological actions? We see that individuals respond to these differently. 2 ways. One, we respond to our environment, we respond to our education, we respond to whatever comes to us in the society based on or determined by the external forces. We take action which is totally determined by external forces. However, there is another way that we could take action, and that is freely shaped by individuals, which is voluntarism, right. So, from a sociological perspective, what is it that is happening? Sociological perspective recognizes free will, within the context of the power of external circumstances, often related to group differences within the social stratification system. So, as teachers, as integral part of our society, each of you has a very strong and a very powerful role to play. This is of importance because you need to understand that once you are in the classroom, once you have these students captive with you for a span of a semester or a year, it's important what attitude, what approach you take towards their learning, how you deal with them, right. So, if you look at the four predominant theories that we talked about, functionalism basically talks about a cohesive system. It says that it stresses on the interdependence of the social system. It says each part is well integrated with each other, and that is our aim, right. Whereas, if you look at the conflict theory, it's largely a struggle. It talks about an individual in conflict with the societal or the sociological stratification, and therefore a movement or a struggle or a conflict to moving towards a better position, right. Then you have symbolic interaction, which talks about the capital theory, how the symbolic interaction becomes so much a key player in what kind of role or what kind of strata the person needs to go and join, what kind of power the student coming from a particular societal strata plays in the classroom. And of course, the fourth one that we discussed talks about equality for all and talks about dealing with social and gender based disparity. Now, as you go back to your classroom, it's extremely important to understand, are we as teachers trying to perpetrate and maintain a status quo of whatever inequality the society has, or are we trying to break that inequality and bring about a more larger, much more open system where we are saying that we get equal opportunities, keeping in mind the diverse cultural backgrounds we come from, keeping in mind the family structure we come from, the multidimensional cultural system or the linguistic system that we belong to. So, that's something that you need to take back when you are looking at these predominant theories in sociology of education that has impacted education in such a strong and powerful way. Thank you.